Ava Monroe stood outside Macy's flagship store at Herald Square, her breath forming clouds in the bitter November air. The building towered above her, lights dimmed, windows dressed in glossy winter displays that sparkled even at midnight. It looked more like a palace sealed in time than a department store. Ava swallowed her nerves. This wasn't the job she wanted, but it was the one she had. She glanced again at the onboarding paper. Night floor attendant, visuals team. Shift, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. Report to back entrance. Not quite the glamorous start she'd imagined after finishing her art degree, but student loans didn't pause for dreams. Rent didn't forgive ambition. This job, strange hours and all, was a necessary step toward survival. She pressed the buzzer beside the employee door. A loud click followed. "Monroe," a voice said through the speaker. "Yes." "Ava Monroe." The heavy door creaked open. Inside was silence. No music, no murmuring customers. Just the low hum of ventilation and the faint scent of old wood and cold perfume. A tall woman in a gray blazer waited by the security desk. She was pale, pin-straight, and without a trace of warmth in her eyes. "I'm Miss Leary." "You're late," she said. Ava blinked at her phone. "It's 11:57. We begin briefing at 11:55. Follow me." Miss Leary led her through staff corridors lined with racks of boxed mannequins and wheeled props. Faded Macy's posters from decades past adorned the walls. The further they walked, the older and dimmer everything looked. "This building has its character," Leary said, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "Respect the guidelines. Don't wander. You are on floor 6 tonight. Do as instructed." Ava nodded silently. They stopped at an old freight elevator with rusted gates. Leary pressed the 6 button. Below it were 2 others, B1 and B2, sealed with dusty plastic covers. Ava's eyes lingered on them. "What's downstairs?" "Storage," Leary replied curtly. "It's off limits." "Understood." "Got it." The elevator groaned to life. As they ascended, Ava noticed how the lights flickered between floors, how the silence felt deeper here than outside. When the doors opened, they revealed a floor frozen in time. High ceilings, aged parquet floors, arched windows overlooking 34th Street. Dozens of mannequins stood like frozen figures in a dream, some fully dressed in holiday fashion, others half bare, with porcelain white limbs and smooth, featureless faces. "You'll rotate window setups nightly," Leary said. "Make sure the mannequins are properly dressed, lit, and logged. Stick to your checklist." She handed Ava a clipboard. "Inventory, styling, and layout updates. Nothing else." "Sure." Leary's voice dropped a notch. "If you feel uneasy, ignore it. Most first-timers do. Don't feed the feeling. It grows." Ava gave a forced smile. "I'll be fine. They're just mannequins." Leary didn't smile back. She turned, heels clicking away into the elevator. The doors closed, leaving Ava alone. And the first hour passed without incident. Ava enjoyed the solitude. The quiet let her focus, and the checklist was straightforward. Rotate 3 window mannequins, update 1 winter outfit with gloves and scarf, and log any damaged props. She hummed softly as she worked, fixing the scarf on a mannequin in the center window display. It wore a red velvet dress and lace gloves. Ava adjusted its pose slightly, rotating its head for better lighting. She moved to the next one. But as she returned 10 minutes later, the first mannequin was different. Its hand was raised slightly, palm tilted toward her. She stared at it. Had she left it like that? She walked over and readjusted it back to the previous position. "Just tired," she muttered. She returned to the main aisle, now surrounded by dozens of mannequins in various poses. Some seemed more human than they should. One wore a trench coat and looked disturbingly like someone waiting at a bus stop. Another had a smile painted onto its smooth face. Ava shivered. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the lights flickered. Only for a second, but long enough. When they returned, she noticed something chilling. One mannequin had moved. Not a lot, just enough to matter. It now faced her, even though it had been angled toward the escalator a moment ago. And its hand, slightly raised before, now reached outward, fingers bent in an unnatural, grasping curl. Ava's mouth went dry. She looked around. Is someone messing with me? No answer. She turned quickly. Several mannequins had shifted. Only a little. Heads tilted. Hands raised. Feet turned outward like they'd taken a half step forward. She walked faster, retracing her steps to the elevator. She pressed the button. Nothing. No hum. No ding. No doors opening. Just silence. She tried the emergency stairwell, but her breath began to fog in the air. The temperature had dropped, but the vents still blew warm air. This cold felt different, like it wasn't part of the building. Suddenly, something behind her creaked. She turned quickly. 3 mannequins now stood directly in the main hallway, ones that had been in the display window minutes earlier. Their arms hung down unnaturally, their heads tilted to one side. They looked like they had been walking and had just stopped. She backed away slowly. Then she heard it. Like footsteps on the hardwood floor. Deliberate. She swung around. No one there. Then again, click. She grabbed the walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. Security? Miss Leary? Anyone? Static. Nothing. She pulled out the flashlight from the prop desk drawer and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness like a knife. When she turned it toward the mannequins, they were still. Not moving, but not in the same positions. She moved carefully toward the elevator once more, hoping by some miracle it had reset. The doors stood open. She stepped forward, then froze. Inside the elevator stood a mannequin. But not just any mannequin. It wore a black sweater. Her sweater, the same jeans, the same shoes, the same name tag clipped to its chest. Its eyes were painted a pale gray blue, just like hers. Its right hand clutched a clipboard. Her own clipboard was gone. The mannequin's head tilted, mouth slightly parted, as if trying to speak. Ava stumbled back, hand over her mouth. The lights flickered again. And when they came back, the mannequin was gone. But the clipboard was on the elevator floor. Her clipboard. She backed away, nearly slipping, and ran toward the center of the floor, her flashlight shaking in her grip. One by one, the mannequins began to shift. Subtle turns. Small movements. Each time she looked away, they changed. Until finally, every mannequin on the floor was facing her. Their heads aligned. Their empty faces aimed straight at her trembling form. She dropped the flashlight, and everything went dark. Ava didn't remember falling. She only remembered waking up. Her cheek was pressed against cold parquet flooring. Somewhere in the distance, the soft clack of plastic echoed, a sound like a mannequin's hand brushing the wall. For a moment, she was too disoriented to move. Then memory returned, rushing into her chest like ice water. The flashlight, the mannequin in her clothes, all of them turning to face her. She pushed herself up, breathing hard. Her watch read 3:12 a.m. The store was dimmer now. The emergency lights had kicked in, pale yellow glows flickering every few feet, just enough to shape shadows, not dissolve them. Her clipboard lay at the foot of a display table. When she picked it up, she noticed a note taped to the back. One she hadn't seen before. It was typed in courier font on an old piece of paper, the edges brittle and brown. You opened your eyes. Don't blink too long. Ava's fingers trembled. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the room. The mannequins were no longer all facing her. Some were gone entirely. The spaces they'd occupied stood empty, as if they had simply walked away. Her first thought was to escape, call someone, anyone. But her phone was dead, even though it had been at 70% earlier. She checked the break room charger. Did the landline? It was as if Macy's had swallowed her whole. She moved toward the service elevator. The doors were cracked open this time, stuck halfway as if jammed. She peered inside, shining her flashlight into the shaft. Below her, far below, a dim red light pulsed, like an exit sign buried underground. She saw the sealed buttons, B1 and B2. She remembered what Miss Leary had said. Storage. Off limits. But now she wondered, what kind of storage required warning labels and sealed panels? She found a panel key hanging near the emergency phone box, covered in dust. With a breath she didn't realize she was holding, she inserted the key into the panel and the cover for the basement buttons clicked open. B1. She hesitated and pressed it. The elevator groaned, slow, reluctant. As it descended, the fluorescent light above her head buzzed and dimmed. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Not just temperature-wise, atmospherically. Like the weight of the earth above her pressed down on her soul. The doors opened. It wasn't a basement. It was something else. The floor stretched endlessly, far larger than the building's footprint. The air smelled of old paper, formaldehyde, and makeup. Ava stepped out. The room was filled with mannequins. Hundreds of them. Rows and rows of dismembered torsos, arms hanging from ceiling hooks, heads lined up on old wooden shelves. But these weren't like the ones upstairs. They were older. Some were carved from wood, faces cracked and flaking. Others were made from plaster, wearing faint expressions, smiles, smirks, and in one case, an open scream. Each one was tagged. Handwritten notes. Years. 1932, 1947, 1959. She walked between them slowly, brushing cobwebs aside. She reached one mannequin that looked eerily lifelike. Too human in posture, lips curled slightly, painted eyes too detailed. The tag on its chest read, Former Floor Manager, 1964. Her chest tightened. Was it a joke? A prank? She turned to leave, only to find a mannequin now blocking the elevator. It wasn't there before. She blinked. It stepped closer. Ava ran. She darted between rows of metal racks, shelves of dusty hats, cracked mirrors, and old signage. She passed a wall with framed photos, black and white employee portraits. One photo had been defaced, scratched so thoroughly that only a nameplate remained beneath it. Alistair, Display Director, 1931 to 1957. The wall next to it held a door. Showroom B, the plaque read. She opened it. Inside was silence and terror. The room was laid out like a 1950s department floor. Fully dressed mannequins posed mid-step as if frozen while shopping. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, and ancient speakers played faint instrumental music. At the center stood a raised circular platform with one figure posed dramatically, hands extended upward like a dancer. But this mannequin had fingernails. Painted red. Ava stepped closer. Her heart pounded. The skin wasn't plastic. It was leathery. The lips, dry and cracked. The eyelashes real. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a corpse. Preserved. A plaque beneath it read, Perfection. Spring 1956. Ava gasped, stumbling backward. Her breath echoed off the display glass. The music scratched to a stop. Behind her, movement. Slow, steady. She turned and saw a tall figure emerging from the shadows of the showroom, dressed in an old tailor's suit, black gloves, and wearing a mannequin's face as a mask. Its voice, when it spoke, was hoarse and calm. You shouldn't be here, it said. Ava ran. Back through the basement. Past the shelves. Past the portraits. Past the dismembered arms reaching from shadows. Behind her, the footsteps followed. Not fast, but relentless. She slammed the elevator button. It didn't open. Instead, her flashlight caught something horrifying. A line of mannequins now stood in formation, lining the path she'd just run down. Their heads slowly turning, one by one, toward her. Their mouths opened, plastic creaking like old doll joints. And from somewhere deep in the walls, a voice whispered, Don't blink too long. The elevator dinged. She jumped in, slammed the 6 button. The doors barely closed before she saw the mask appear around the corner, expressionless. Watching. The ride back up was silent. No music. No light. But Ava could feel it. The mannequins were coming. And this time, they knew her name. The elevator doors opened to floor 6 with a whisper, not a ding. Ava didn't wait. She bolted out, breath ragged, eyes wild. The mannequins stood as they had hours earlier, perfectly posed, dressed, lifeless, but now she could feel them watching her. Every one of them. They didn't move. They didn't have to. Their presence filled the room like a thick, invisible fog. She ran past the frozen winter display, past the staff desk, and straight to the emergency stairwell. She slammed into the bar. It opened. The door groaned like it hadn't been moved in years. Her pulse jumped. She charged down the stairs. Floor 5. Then 4. Then 3. Her shoes clanged against the metal steps, echoing like warning bells. Each time she paused for breath, she heard it, clicking sounds, high heels on wood, rubber on tile. They were following. She reached the ground floor and shoved open the exit. And froze. Everything was wrong. Where the holiday decor should have been, there was nothing. The lights were dimmed to amber. Dust covered the registers. The large glass doors at the front sealed shut. She ran to them and pressed her hands against the glass. But it wasn't glass. It was cold. Like marble. And through it, she didn't see the city. She saw mannequins. Dozens. No, hundreds. They stood silently outside, packed together like an audience at a theater. All staring inward. All staring at her. Ava gasped and staggered backward. Behind her, she spun around. A mannequin stood in the center of the lobby. It hadn't been there before. Then another click. Another. Mannequins stepped silently out from behind pillars, display walls, checkout counters. Not running. Not rushing. Just moving. Toward her. Ava turned and ran through the west hallway toward the freight elevator. She was gasping now, every part of her screaming to wake up from this nightmare. And then she saw someone. Miss Leary. Standing straight in the glow of a single flickering bulb. Her hands were folded neatly. You, Ava whispered. You knew. Leary didn't blink. We all started where you are. Why me? Why bring me here? You applied. Ava shook her head. You're insane. No, Leary said softly. Just part of the team. Behind her, the freight elevator opened with a soft chime. But inside was not the elevator. It was the showroom from the basement. Perfectly arranged. At its center, a raised platform. Empty. Waiting. No, Ava whispered. Yes, Leary said. The mannequins closed in. Dozens now. They didn't lunge. They didn't speak. They just turned their heads in unison. Toward the platform. Toward her. She turned and ran, not into the elevator, but down the opposite corridor. Past the old supply racks. Past the prop storage. She found a rusted door marked archives. She pushed through. Darkness. Shelves of old clothing, display pieces, filing cabinets, and mannequins. Some dismembered, some slumped in wheelchairs, others in rows like sleeping soldiers. At the far end, a red glowing sign, Exit. She ran toward it, burst through the door, into freezing air. She was outside, but not on the street. She was on the roof. Wind howled around her. The city blinked below, distant, unreachable. She collapsed to her knees. Alone. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Until, far above, a beam of light swept across her. The police chopper. And for the first time in hours, Ava screamed. The news broke at dawn. Young woman found on roof of Macy's Herald Square after going missing during presumed overnight shift. Macy's officials deny knowledge of night staff presence. No security footage recovered. Investigation ongoing. Ava didn't speak to reporters. She left New York within a week. She never returned. But every now and then, in another city, another window, she'd pass by a department store, look into the display, and freeze. Because sometimes one mannequin looked too familiar, not in clothes or face, but in posture, as if remembering her. Back at Macy's, Miss Leary walked calmly through the private showroom below. The mannequins had been repositioned. The spotlight above the center platform glowed warmly. The newest figure stood elegantly posed, eyes glassy, skin pale, wrapped in a red scarf. Ava, still silent, beautiful, exceptional, Leary said, noting it on her clipboard. Behind her, a shadow stepped into the room. The display director, a tall man in an old-fashioned suit, his face hidden behind a blank porcelain mask. He nodded once and smiled.